This is Bedtime Stories, Grown-Up Edition, The Stepmother, Part 1. The first Saturday after the funeral of Nigel Adonis St. James, his wife and now widow, Catherine Montclair St. James, was preparing for the arrival of his 5 children, 23-year-old Sincere, 21-year-old Saint, and 19-year-old triplets, Simone, Shantal, and Star, children that her husband sired with his mistress, Annabelle. While the staff at the St. James estate in Miami were completing preparations on the main patio, Catherine was reminiscing. She'd known Nigel for more than 40 years. When they met, she was a child. Her best friend in the whole world, Contessa, was dating his youngest brother, Artemis, also known as Art. And Nigel, who was more than 10 years her senior, was well known in Trinidad and Tobago for partying and stirring up BS and mayhem everywhere he went. He had a reputation for being a bad boy and a ladies' man. And from Catherine's estimation, he was far out of her league. But he was her speed, because at 14 years old, her father had already introduced her to the life. The patriarch of the Montclair family was a gangster in his own right, and an associate of Nigel and Art's father, Quincy Anders St. James II. It was clear to anyone who was watching that the eldest of the St. James boys, Quincy Anders St. James III, was involved in the family business as little as he could get away with, because he had designs on education in America and living the life of a legitimate civilian. That meant that the second-born son, Nigel, was next up at bat. And while he was willing and technically prepared, even Catherine, at 14 years old, knew that Nigel was way too rough around the edges. He was too flashy, too busy being outside, too caught up with women, and he spent way too much time drinking and using party rugs to stay in the know and keep up with what was going on in his family's organization. On more than one occasion, Catherine had been given an assignment under Nigel's leadership, where she had to take the reins in order to avoid calamity, earning herself a pretty good paycheck and commendations from Quincy II, at a time when fathers, especially those who were in the life, were still invested in keeping their daughters pure and arranging marriages. Mr. Montclair had already seen the writing on the wall. His 14-year-old daughter had the capacity to be a boss in the game, and while he could very well groom her to take over the Montclair business, her older brother was better suited for that role, and she was better suited as the Kingpin's wife. Shortly after her 15th birthday, her father came to her and said, "Quincy and I had a discussion. He likes what you do and how you do it. He plans to turn the reins over to Nigel, but not until Nigel takes a wife. He wants him to finish sowing his wild oats, and in 4 or 5 years, he's going to have to settle down. If you've got any designs on any little boys your age, you should probably let that go. There aren't any little boys on your level. There isn't anyone else who can give you what you deserve, or in a position to use your unique skill set to ensure that you'll have the finer things in life, the resources to live well, who I trust to take care of you when I'm gone. You're not old enough to be involved with him like that now. You're too young to be involved like that with any man. So I certainly would not give my approval for you to get involved with Nigel St. James, while I know that he's in the beds of any and every woman who's willing to allow him to be. Let him get that out of his system. And when you're old enough, when Quincy and I believe you're ready, and so is he, you'll marry him." Catherine was shocked. She had no idea whether Nigel was in on this plan, or whether her father had any idea that she'd been checking Nigel out. She was daddy's little girl, and all she ever showed him was princess and gangster. So she couldn't let the mask slip now. She said what she knew was the right thing to say in response. "Papa, isn't Nigel a little old for me?" And her father said, "He is, but that's why you need to wait 4 or 5 years. He may be older, but he's not nearly as mature as you are, and you know that. At 15, you're already light years ahead of him. You're light years ahead of the boys your own age, too. When it's time to marry, you want to marry a man who's already well established, a man who can provide for you and whatever children you have. Marriage is hard work. You'll outlive him, and the reward for all the hard work that you'll put in during the marriage will be all the money and property that you inherit when he's gone. Just ask your mother." Catherine couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her father actually wanted her to marry an older man and endure whatever came along with that, so that she could reap the benefits when he was dead. And he was insinuating that her mother had done the same. She did the math in her head quickly and realized that her father was 15 years her mother's senior. Catherine asked, "So what if he never stops doing the things that he's doing now?" Her father said, "Oh, he'll stop. Believe me, Quincy will ensure that he understands what's at stake, not only for his marriage, but for his legacy and the legacy of the St. James organization. He wouldn't be doing himself, his family, or the organization any favors if he publicly shamed you by continuing to be seen in these streets with other women. And what he does privately, you're going to have to be strong enough to negotiate. Catherine had no idea what that meant as a 15-year-old girl, but she suspected that her mother would be able to help her with that. As she watched Nigel's 5 illegitimate children arrive at the sprawling St. James estate in Miami, she thought to herself, 5 years. We had 5 good years. If we would have been able to just have one son, I wouldn't even be in this position right now. Catherine wiped the one stray tear that had escaped from her eyes and ran through her plan of action. It was time for her to begin preparations for Nigel's oldest son to earn his seat at the table, and for his triplet daughters to not only learn how to keep themselves and their family safe, but to embrace the roles that they'd be playing in the family organization as well. Catherine knew all about Nigel's 5 children, who they were, what they did, what they were good at, and what their weaknesses were. She'd only met them in person days before, the day of their father's family-only memorial service, and they only learned of her existence that same day, the day that she'd forced their mother to not only tell them who their father really was, but how each of them had come to be. They were not the product of a loving relationship between their mother Annabelle and their father Nigel. They weren't even really the product of an affair between the two. Annabelle had lied about being on birth control, getting pregnant with Sincere. And then when Nigel stopped sleeping with her, she drugged him to get her pregnant a second time with Saint. And when he'd taken the strapping up on the few occasions when he was intimate with her, she took fertility drugs and dug the used condom out of the trash and turkey basted herself. She got herself pregnant with the triplets. And that was Nigel's last straw. He not only ended their romantic relationship, but he relegated her to a check in the mail every month. He still spent time with his children, but Annabelle had to jump through hoops to convince her children that she and their father were an item. And she drugged that story for 20 years. And after she confessed all, her children met the rest of their family, aunts, uncles, cousins, while their mother was escorted from the property, taken to the home that she'd lived in for a number of years, to collect her possessions, lick her wounds, and figure out her next move. Because Catherine not only evicted her from the home that her husband owned, which she now owned, but she repossessed the 2 vehicles that were also titled, registered, and insured in her husband's name. At the end of the night, she had her husband's right-hand man, Amir, transport Nigel's 5 children to another property that she owned, a property that was wired for video and sound. They had until the morning to decide what they wanted to do. Did they want to join the St. James family, which will require them to follow Catherine's rules? Or did they want to continue their lives as is, as Montclair's, the last name that Nigel had Annabelle put on their birth certificates? She actually believed that it was Nigel's mother's maiden name. She had no idea that it was actually Catherine's. Before they left the St. James estate, Catherine had let Sincere know that it was up to him to get his siblings on board, because it was all of them or none of them. And the only way that he'd be able to claim the throne is if he could get all 4 of his siblings on board. To that point, Saint was the only one who was involved in the family business. He'd been being trained as a finisher for the family, someone who's called in to find people, things, and information that the enemies of the family had taken or were hiding by any means necessary. Finishers conducted covert operations, went undercover, executed rescues, obtained information, and took away goods before the enemies had any clue what was happening. And when there were people involved, they found them and either freed them or unalived them, typically without having ever been detected. Saint was still learning, but he'd shown that he was good at it, because it did run in the family. But the triplets, they'd had no idea what their father was into. And while they'd had some basic training in self-defense, they were not war ready. All 3 were college students, pampered princesses who were not about their life. Simone was focused on finance and her very volatile same-gender relationship with her girlfriend Autumn. Shantal was focused on psychology and religious studies and her abnormally close relationship with her married pastor. And Star was focused on fashion, interior design, her sorority, partying hard, and finding her a man like her mother. So at 9 a.m. Wednesday, when Nigel's right hand, Amir, brought Sincere to the St. James estate to give Catherine the final verdict. He informed Catherine that he and his siblings would become part of the St. James family and the St. James organization. She put them on ice back at the house until after their father's funeral and observed. They had no idea that she was privy to everything they said and did. While they were not allowed to attend his public funeral, they were invited back to the St. James estate after the repast on Thursday night, where they had the opportunity to meet and mingle with their family members. And Star had the opportunity to make her apologies to the women who she'd offended. On Tuesday, after the reading of her father's will, she'd made the mistake of being caught checking out Big Wood, Benjamin Woodrow Stevens Jr., also known as Woody, Big Wood, and Wood. He was more than just an employee or accused best friend. He was family. He was also the fiancé of True Joy Burton, the finisher turned right hand in training of Stephanie Spencer Taylor, the niece of the head of the Lopez family, Emmanuel Lopez. And Stephanie was next up at the throne. Stephanie and True were best friends, and completing out their trio, the Three Musketeers, was Renea Johnson, the baby sister of LJ, Lawrence Johnson, who was the best friend and brother of Quincy Anders St. James IV, also known as Q. Q had just been crowned the head of the St. James family on Friday, but that's a story for another day. True was not in the room when Stephanie checked Star, and by the time True returned, Stephanie and Rennie were putting a smackdown on all three of the triplets, because Simone had come to her younger triplets' defense. Shantal had just got caught in the crossfire, and all three found out the hard way that Stephanie and Rennie ain't nothing to play with. Apologies were made. Forgiveness had been given, and as a result of meetings held by the OGs, the members of the family were prepared to welcome Nigel's 5 children with open arms. They'd be keeping an eye on them, though. They'd also be mentoring them, giving them the game, the information, and the tools that they need to stay off the government's radar, out of the crosshairs of their enemies, and on a path to their individual, collective, and family success. This meeting with Catherine and the children was intended to head some things off at the pass. There were some things that Catherine had overheard that would need to be addressed before Nigel's children returned to their regularly scheduled programs, while also accepting their new roles. Catherine was most interested in the discussions that the children had before they made their final decision. And it started with Saint and Sincere. Saint had taken Sincere to the side and said, "I ain't got no problem working for our father's wife, and I ain't got no problem working for you. But if that damn lady did something to my mother, she gonna be meeting her husband in hell. If you know where mommy is, you should probably say something." Sincere said, "I don't know where she is. If I understand correctly, she was trying to find some place to take all her stuff, because she got evicted today. And I'm sure she's somewhere in her feelings and licking her wounds. She literally told us that she was a jump-off who tried to trap a married gangster, steal him from his wife, and cash out. And it didn't work out. She might be a little embarrassed, don't you think?" Saint said, "Well, damn, you ain't got to describe her like that." Sincere said, "I'm not describing her, I'm describing the situation." Saint said, "I think mommy really loved Pops, though. You don't be with nobody for 25 years and endure the shame of being a side chick." Sincere said, "She wasn't with him for 25 years. She was barely with him for 5, and she was sharing him the whole time. I guess you could say if you have 5 kids with somebody, you gotta have some kind of love for them. But I'm compelled to believe that we were all just pawns in a game that she lost. She let us believe that they were in a relationship to save face. She had to do something. She couldn't bring no other niggas around." Say said, "Pops was diabolical. He need to be glad he dead. Because if I would have heard all this while he was alive, I'd have killed that nigga." Sincere said, "You can't be too mad at him. Our mother was a willing participant." Saint said, "Our mother was damn near a child. He was a grown-ass man with a wife. She might have been scheming, but he took advantage of her youth and her naivete." Sincere said, "Naivete? She lied about taking birth control and put holes in condoms, Saint. She drugged the man and got knocked up with you. That's a crime. She then took a used condom out of the trash and impregnated herself. Also, a crime. You know they prosecute women for that, right? Maybe your memory not as good as mine, but I remember Pops telling us a story about his own father, often a pregnant woman, who'd intentionally gotten herself pregnant and was threatening to tell his wife." Saint said, "Yo, I do remember that. You know what else I remember? I remember him telling us a story about twin." Sincere said, "The one about that woman that came in the restaurant?" Saint said, "Yeah, Nigel had told his sons a story about the infamous twin backing out on a woman who walked into a restaurant in Trinidad with the intention of confronting Nigel about hitting it and quitting it. And before the woman could get 2 words out, twin had backed out the baby 380s, laid her out in the restaurant, and continued eating. Saint said, I should have knew right there that twin was a woman and that twin was his wife. Sincere said, I thought you knew. I had put it together. Saint said, I needed to believe that him and mommy were together and they loved each other. Sincere said, unfortunately, I saw how mommy moved for real. And it was clear what kind of man Pops was. You gotta be honest with yourself. She not even half the woman Catherine is. And I love my mother. Saint said, I don't even want to talk about this no more. Sincere said, come on, bro. I'm just saying. Saint said, I don't want to see her like that. I don't want to think about my mother like that. Sincere said, and that's probably why she not answering the phone, bro. When the brothers returned to the ongoing conversation that their triplet sisters were having, they walked in right when Shantal said, I wish I could call my pastor and discuss this with him and have him pray with me. And Simone said, girl, bye. You come up with any excuse in the world to talk to that man. We all here discussing it together, and you can pray for your own self. Saint said, Shantal, you ain't learned nothing from mommy's story. Leave that married man alone. Shantal said, it is not like that. He is a pastor. He's a man of God. Saint said, he's a man before he's a man of God. The fact that you don't see that man been grooming you all these years is crazy as hell. How many women in that church he done bagged? How many of them kids running around in there call him daddy? Shantal said, that's because he's our spiritual father. Sincere said, I know damn well you're not calling that damn nigga daddy. Star said, she probably called him daddy when he bending her over. Shantal said, Star, I'll have you all know my pastor has never been inappropriate with me. And I find it hard to believe that he's been inappropriate with any other woman in our church. I said, but I bet if he tried it, you'd be giving it up. Shantal said, I'm waiting for God to send me a husband. Until then, Jesus is my boyfriend. Then Saint said, let me guess, your pastor daddy is going to tell you when the man that God wants you to be with comes along, right? Shantal said, of course, because he hears from God. And Star asked, and what you going to do when he tells you that God said that he's the man for you? And Shantal got red in the face, because if her pastor ever said those words, she was giving it up. And Sincere said, listen, there are lots of reasons why we need to work with Catherine, become members of the St. James family, and join the St. James organization. Not only will it provide us with a real family, but it'll also provide us with resources and connections. Put us all in positions where we can take care of ourselves, the families that we create in the future, and our mother, because she's going to need our help. She's not going to be able to keep doing what she's been doing. Shantal said, I understand all that, but my issue is I can't be like killing people. Saint said, come on now, sis. Everything ain't for everybody. Pop started training me for my role because he knew I'd be good at it. And he sent Sincere to New York to learn all that business and political stuff because he knew he'd be good at whatever role Catherine is going to give him. Sincere said, we may not know Catherine all that well, but she knows us. She knows a lot about us. It wouldn't be in her best interest, the family's best interest, or ours for her to give any of us roles that we can't handle, that we're not suited for. Simone said, I have issue with these people knowing all about my life, and I don't know a damn thing about them. Sincere said, right. And this is an opportunity for you to get to know them, but not in an adversarial way. You've been with that damn Autumn so long that everything is a fight to you. Catherine knows about us, but the family doesn't. We haven't had any aunts, uncles, cousins, nothing. Just us and mommy and pops. This is a chance for y'all to get the game from real women. Women other than mommy and her little friends, especially you, Star. Star said, you mean the women who attacked me earlier? Sincere said, no, I mean the women who put you in your place earlier. Instead of looking for a man to be your meal ticket, you got a chance to be a boss chick. A chance to be with a man because you want to, not because you need to. And to be found by a man who you ain't got to manipulate. Simone, you good with money. You in school learning all about investments and stocks and all the ways to make your money make money for you. I'm sure the family could use that. Shantal said, I just can't see a place that would be appropriate for me in that family's business. Saint said, so you didn't see the man in the clergy collar? The one who was standing next to the woman who DDT'd Simone into you. Saint said, Pops always talked about how important God was, how important having a spiritual covering was in his business. Shantal said, God is not blessing any mess. Simone said, Shantal, you are not God's spokesperson. The last time I checked, the ground was even at the foot of the cross. The Bible says, come as you are. Shantal said, yeah, but it doesn't say that you should stay that way. Sincere said, I say we take a vote. All in favor of joining the family and all that comes along with that, say aye. They said their ayes, and Sincere said, all opposed? And Shantal said, aye. And if we're going to do this, I think that the vote should be unanimous. I'm not convinced yet. The siblings stayed up all night trying to convince Shantal that joining the family wasn't only a good decision, it was the only decision. And then at 5:30, 5:45 in the morning, all of the children received a text message from their mother that said, everything that I own is in storage. You'll need to go by the house and pick up anything that you left there. It's all packed up and waiting for you, labeled with your names on it. Since I am now homeless, I decided to take my final dispersal and go on a little vacation. I need to collect my thoughts, lick my wounds, and plan my next move. I've also decided that I'm not splitting this money with y'all. You have the opportunity of a lifetime. Take it. Let me know what you decide, but choose wisely, because if you make the wrong choice, I'm never coming back. Reading that, Shantal said, okay, all right, I'm in.